Formula One cars these days look pretty similar, but even small differences unnoticeable to the untrained eye can be controversial and revolutionary. Here we tell you about some of the most controversial F1 car designs that changed everything. Stay tuned to find out how engineers have gotten the edge on their competitors throughout history. First, we have Brabham GT46. Formula One cars are cool, but which one is the coolest? The Brabham GT46 took cooling to a whole different level. It was introduced by the Brabham team at the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix and quickly became the talk of the town. The controversial point about this car was its use of a fan which helped to create a massive amount of downforce. Brabham thought they could get away with it by claiming that the fan was used for cooling purposes. Because of its obvious trademark, it was referred to as the fan car. It only had one race though, at the Swedish Grand Prix, which Niki Lauda won dominantly. But Bernie Eccleston, then team owner of Brabham, decided to withdraw the car anyway. This was because that year he was being promoted to the head of the Formula One Constructors Association, FOCA, and didn't want any controversy about his former team. Other teams quickly protested, but the car was actually deemed fully legal to use for the entire whole season. It was only because of Eccleston's career that we didn't get to see a whole season of the coolest car in history. Next up, Dual Axis System 2020, the DAS system. In the 2020 Mercedes W11 car, there was a hidden feature in the steering wheel. Other teams began to pick up on the feature when viewing footage from the Mercedes cockpit. It showed drivers Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas pulling on the steering wheel backwards and forwards. But what did it do? The whole idea is to be able to get the temperature back into the tires of the car quickly. The dual axis system, or DAS as it was called, allowed the drivers to change what is called the toe angle through their steering wheels. The toe angle is how much the wheel turns inwards or outwards. You might think that the tires are all facing forward evenly, but this would make it harder to turn and longer to turn at each corner. F1 is all about turning quickly, and so teams have to find the right angle to minimize both oversteer and understeer. But how does all that relate to heating the tires? Well, the DAS that Mercedes innovated allowed their drivers to reduce the toe angle, which generates more heat at the front. They can then put it back to its original toe-out position, which generates less heat but is better for cornering. Red Bull protested the technology, but this was rejected by the FIA, and the innovation was deemed legal. And Horner implied that Red Bull would be developing their own version of the system too. That didn't stop the FIA from banning the technology for the next season, but now that it has been developed, it has a range of possible applications to different driving competitions other than F1. Up next, Racing Point RP20 2020, the pink Mercedes. When billionaire Lawrence Stroll bought the Formula One team Racing Point in 2019, he wanted to reignite the passion that existed for its predecessor, Force India. No one was expecting them to be up there with Red Bull and Mercedes, but where would they fall in the middle of the pack? In 2020 preseason testing, many teams were noticing how similar the Racing Point RP20 was to the Mercedes W10 car from the previous season, and as the RP20 looked stronger and stronger throughout testing, it was dubbed the pink Mercedes, especially because it was powered by a Mercedes engine. As is always the case in Formula One, other teams were quick to protest the car. They focused on the brake ducts, which under the regulations is a part of the car that teams must design entirely by themselves. An FIA investigation into the parts resulted in a €400,000 fine and 15 points deducted from Racing Point's Constructors' Championship. Lawrence Stroll was outraged by the protests of the other teams and called the protests poor sportsmanship. For other teams, though, the penalties didn't go far enough. They argued that it was unfair that they were allowed to continue racing with parts that had been deemed illegal. The pink Mercedes did pretty well that season. Lance Stroll got 2 podiums, Sergio Perez won the Sakir Grand Prix, and Racing Point finished an impressive 4th in the Constructors' Championship. That was above protesters Ferrari and Renault, which they were not happy about. How did one team gain half a second through a regulation loophole? And which revolutionary car from the 70s is the most important for the development of the 2022 Formula One cars? Don't go anywhere. All of that is coming up next. Next we have McLaren's F-Duct 2010. You know when the vacuum cleaner's head gets stuck and you can feel the change in suction? Well, this was the basic idea behind McLaren's F-Duct in 2010 to give the driver the power to change the direction of airflow. At preseason testing, the McLaren car was turning a lot of heads in the paddock for an interesting-looking snorkel-like component on the top of the car. But how did this help the performance of the McLaren? Basically, downforce is very important for Formula One cars to corner and turn quickly, but when accelerating down a straight, it is not needed at all. That's where the F-duct came in. Through a number of cleverly positioned holes, the McLaren drivers were able to cover one hole in the cockpit and redirect airflow underneath the rear wing rather than on top of it. That means they still get the maximum downforce the car is designed for in normal times, but when the hole is covered, the car has less drag and a higher top speed by almost 10 kilometers per hour. The innovation was brilliant. Despite not having the best all-round car on the grid, drivers Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button were able to win 5 races between them. A lot of this was thanks to the top speed that the F-duct allowed. By now, you know the story. The other teams complained, but the F-duct was not considered a movable part by the FIA and so was deemed legal. The teams then followed McLaren and developed their own versions before the technology was banned the next season. Come on, FIA, you never let the teams have any fun. Up next, ground effect. Lotus 78. Formula One cars want to stay close to the ground. Give them a little bump and you'll see just how far into the air they fly. Why does that happen? Well, it's because of how important all the aerodynamic designs are in keeping the speed machines gripped to the track. In the 1977 season, Lotus developed aerodynamic techniques that would revolutionize Formula One. It was so impactful that cars today are still using these techniques, and the pioneering car was featured as one of the 25 greatest cars of all time. Lotus figured out that designing the underbody of an F1 car could be used to create extra downforce in the same way that inverted wings on top of a car do. By increasing the speed of the airflow underneath the car, the air becomes a lower pressure and generates more downforce. This genius engineering was so clever that it took other teams a while to realize what was giving the Lotus cars their edge. Neither of the drivers were able to win the season because of reliability issues, but they did win 5 races between them. Ground effect was banned from the 1980s onwards for safety reasons, but this season it is made legal again. This has led to a massive redevelopment of the engineering around ground effect and the unwanted effect of porpoising, which teams are desperately trying to get rid of. The return of legendary ground effect and a bunch of top teams competing, it's a great time to be a Formula One fan. Next, double diffuser 2009, Ross Brawn. What's better than a single diffuser? A double diffuser, of course. The 2009 Brawn GP team was a revolution in Formula One. The team emerged from Ross Brawn, former Benetton and Ferrari technical director, and went on to win the 2009 season with Jenson Button. They were able to do it by capitalizing on the regulation changes for the 2009 season and developing technology around a loophole ahead of the rest of the pack. First, you need to know what a diffuser is. The diffuser is the bodywork of an F1 car that is at the back, part of the floor of the car, and is designed to shoot air out in a way that sucks the car towards the track. From the diffuser alone, about 50% of the downforce is generated. Brawn GP's diffuser was labeled as a double-deck diffuser because it used a 2-level design with a hole in the back that speeds up the airflow. Basically, what this meant was that teams like Brawn, Williams, and Toyota that used the double diffuser had a ton more downforce than all the other teams that didn't, and it was a huge advantage. And Brawn was about a half-second faster than any cars without the double diffuser. Halfway through the season, though, other teams were able to catch up and develop their own versions, but it was too late. Despite Brawn GP slipping down the ladder in the second half of the season, they had done enough to win the Drivers' Championship with Jenson and make history. After that season, the double diffuser was eventually banned, but it led to one of the most unlikely world championships of all time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.